Hello, everybody. Welcome to another broadcast of WLJ Radio, Common Law Under God. Um, Frank is helping me with getting this presented to you. We have one guest, and so far, feel free to join us. And there is a live stream where you can make comments, ask questions on the right. Before we get much further, I want to make a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the signs we are already seeing that the gospel is spreading throughout the globe, even among the Muslims who were once committed to murdering us. We are very aware that Satan's disgusting covetousness towards our bodies and souls and those of our children is no match for your ultimate power, Lord. This awareness of the earthly power of Satan's minions, the psychopath, and that's interesting. I'm getting a lot of pop-ups just right now. The awareness of the earthly power of Satan's minions, namely the psychopaths and the parasites, that power has driven many to be more terrified of Satan's minions than those of us who are obedient to your will. Please move our hearts to change the direction that they are in right now. The upcoming election cycle presents another test for some of us. Instead of choosing the lesser of two evils between sacrifice to Moloch, who eats children, or Mammon, who consumes souls through greed, help the people understand that Satan's corporate elections are not a source of solutions, even to our earthly problems. Please give me the words to say to bring more people to your kingdom, Lord. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay. Now, the title of the broadcast is, and I wanted people to know that I invited a group of about apparently 20 people who are certainly exhibiting psychopathic behavior to join us and give their side of the story, if any. In the meantime, I've asked Frank to pull up the psychopathy checklist that was created by a psychologist by the name of Robert Hare, H-A-R-E, Canadian fellow, I think, and whose first job was in a prison. And he was quick to point out that for the most part, people in the penitentiary are not, they may be somewhat more likely to be psychopaths than the general population, but not really necessarily. They tend to have other psychological disorders. They tend to come from poverty, and they come from abusive and neglectful family situations, for sure. And many of them are victims of actual psychopaths. The incidence of psychopathy in the general population, according to Dr. Hare, is some 2% of the population. And so before we start talking about them and how they are in groups and what our means are to survive encounters with them, I wanted to go into the characteristics according to Robert Hare. Okay, and to note that people often confuse psychopathy with psychosis, and just to make sure you understand, an individual who is psychotic, supposedly, this is according to literature, if you can believe any of the psychiatric or psychological literature, but according to a lot of it, uh, psychoses are the inability to deal with reality and delusions, hallucinations. Um, Typically, a psychotic and schizophrenia, so-called, is included as a psychosis. Um, those people are not particularly a danger to others. They're more a danger to themselves, and they tend to typically be victims of other personality disordered people. But people who are psychotic um, have a pretty good diagnosis or prognosis um, if they can get themselves off of the the various chemicals that usually are bringing on the psychotic symptoms, including psych drugs, which I think we talked about last time. Psych drugs and other pharmaceutical products. Um, Welcome, Michael. Um, so we've got that. Let's set that aside. Psychotics are not particularly dangerous to others. Um, Now there's the psychotics that have command hallucinations. Supposedly, I think that's extremely rare. But of course, like anything else, any psychiatric disorder, the folks at MK Ultra and DARPA can certainly um, stimulate those characteristics, so that they sort of like gain a function, you know. Anyway, all right. So looking at the characteristics, you might want to think about the last time you had an encounter with cabal minions, and a lot of those people are not necessarily psychotic, but they certainly engage in psychotic behavior. If you talk about repeatedly um, kidnapping people at gunpoint, oftentimes raping people, murdering people, because it's part of the job, you know. Uh, and not having any particular qualms about it is kind of, you know, characteristic of a psychopath. But now, with a little luck, I can figure out how to enlarge the screen and be able to. Wait a minute, I think there I go. All right, I'm going to enlarge the screen, and the first characteristic is kind of a stereotype characteristic, is the glibness, superficial charm, and I would say that's probably a developed characteristic, because it's in order to create victims, it's going to be much easier if you can gain their cooperation, and what better way to gain their cooperation than to be charming and glib. Being glib, you know, so that when your stories about what you've done or why you screwed up or why you hurt them are revealed to be false, you can, you know, the psychopath can think of a good explanation usually. I had a recent experience with somebody who a Muslim, actually. I mean, that's not really necessarily indicating that Muslims are more inclined to be psychopaths than anybody else, although they apparently, a subgroup of them had the characteristic of saying it was part of their religion to kill Christians. So that sounds kind of psychopathic. Anyway, he asked me to help him, uncover basically a uh, a a criminal operation that probably is going on in state of New York and as well as other places, and targets often the immigrant population. Um, in any case, I he gave me some of the facts. He provided some documents, and he was, of course, as many people are who come to me. They're being victimized, but typically the people who come to me, um, some do recognize their own gullibility or their own role in some way in participating in their own victimization. And this guy didn't really have that. He had been subject to an arranged marriage with a fellow worshiper of Islam, and went through a lot of bureaucratic mumbo jumbo to get her into the country, and she only stayed with them a short time. There were allegations of abuse or neglect. He said that she never signed anything that would give any facts to back any of that up. And of course, being aware that there's financial inducements to these allegations, oftentimes when they're false. And his saying that there was no actual hard evidence, there was not even a sworn statement. So when I was an attorney, I represented a lot of women who were legitimately physically abused, and there was usually a lot of evidence. And when I asked for protection orders on their behalf, I put it out there, and because I wanted to get an immediate order, which you can get in their system. And I didn't really understand that I was going to get an immediate order anyway, because there was a financial inducement to granting that immediate order. So anyway, come to find out, I worked on this notice of liability for quite some time. He didn't understand most of it. We went through why we were addressing the people who were in a position of being puppet masters over these operations that had victimized him, and I was aware that they had victimized others through the Title 4D scams with child support that oftentimes never goes to the mom, usually, that is raising the child, and gets siphoned off in a lot of other directions. In any case, I finally completed it, and didn't really get a lot of cooperation from him. But then at one point, as he's about to serve the first notice, he lets me know that, he did something really foolish, and that's just because he hated his, I guess now ex-wife, so much, he decided to pull off this elaborate scam, and to accuse her. He went to the library, and he posed as if he were she, created a new email and sent out terrorist threats. This is from his own mouth, he tells me this. Sends out terrorist threats to various cabal members. And anyway, apparently there were cameras in the library, and it wasn't really very difficult to establish what he had done. And he sent me various documents, including his attorney's statement, that this guy's only offense is he hates his ex-wife. That's his only offense. Well, that and bearing false witness against another human being, I don't know. To me, that just seemed maybe not glib, but it seemed like there seemed to be no. When he explained it to me, and of course I'm wondering, why are you telling me this now? But when he explained it, he made it sound like it was no big deal, but just something he had to get out of the way so I would know. He had chosen not to tell me at the beginning and throughout the month or so that I spent quite a bit of time on this. And anyway, so he never deviated from his playing the victim role. He was always the victim. And that ties into some of these other factors. I just wanted to bring that up at the beginning. I don't know if the guy's a psychopath or not, but it doesn't seem like the provocation and it being directed toward this woman who apparently was as much of a pawn in the system as he was. I don't see how the provocation fit the elaborate lengths that he went to punish her. And and they had allegedly a child together, which he refused to acknowledge existed. But that sounded sort of plausible. He said he was told that a child was born. He was never allowed to see a photograph of the child, never saw the child. He asked for DNA testing, and of course I know that any results are never going to be testified about by anybody with actual personal knowledge who knew the chain of custody of the DNA that was extracted. So that seemed plausible too. But anyway, I just bring that up because I like to think that I'm a pretty good judge of character and I can tell if somebody's BSing me, but I have to say that went right past me and made me think about folks that are drawn to doing the 3 notice process and their motivations. So anyway, for what it's worth. Okay, the next characteristic apparently is a previous diagnosis. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's probative. Maybe it's not. Remember we talked last time about how psychiatric diagnosis is not valid. It doesn't test what it's supposed to test, and it's also not reliable. So it's really unlikely that any 2 diagnosticians are going to come up with the same diagnosis on the same man or woman given the same facts. They're unlikely to come up with the same diagnosis. So if they're unlikely to come up with the same diagnosis, and this runs across 4 or 5 diagnosticians, and they come up with 4 or 5 different diagnoses, are any of them correct? Does that even mean anything? For those of you who read the Wayne Ramsey article about is psychiatric diagnosis a hoax or something, that was something like what the title was. Maybe a previous diagnosis as a psychopath or similar may not mean much. The third item, the egocentricity or the grandiosity. Wow, I get a lot of that, and I think everybody else, anybody who's on Facebook sees quite a bit of that. Had a woman and statistically, of the 2% that are supposed to be true psychopaths, usually it tends to be men more than women, but that's changing. That seems to be changing. And the incidence of psychopathy or psychopathic behavior seems to be on the increase. Maybe because of the psych drugging, maybe because of all the trauma. For whatever reason, this woman had posted on Facebook that she was going to hire herself out as someone who would help people through an unpleasant divorce, because she had been through an unpleasant divorce and she had great insights as a result, and like no other, she said, like no other. And she came up, yeah, she was asking for tips on what she should include in her resume. And anyway, I made a comment that, gee, I don't know. You sound delusional and self-idolatrous to me. And she wasn't phased a bit. Oh, how so? I wasn't going to take time to go into it if she couldn't see that the little bit she'd pasted on a giant meme at that too. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions so far? You can unmute yourself if you do. All right. Proneness to boredom, low frustration tolerance. Yeah, okay. Of course, that can fit other conditions too. Pathological lying and deception. I think that's one of the bigger ones, especially if the man or woman that you're talking about is, that trait is definitely present. It's sometimes I hate to call them a patient, because usually these folks don't identify as patients because they don't think anything's wrong. The only thing that's wrong is with other people. So they will admit sometimes that they were lying, but it's often because they have a good reason for it. They had to lie. They had to... and for me, what struck me, in my gut about the Muslim guy was the elaborateness of the deception scheme that he went into with relatively little provocation. So I don't know. I think over time you can develop kind of a sixth sense about people, but having these markers are, having that could be kind of helpful. Of course, going with that is the conning, the lack of sincerity. Keep in mind that in the system that is maybe not entirely administered by psychopaths, but is certainly inspired by psychopaths. Originally, the psychopaths from the Roman Empire that many bar members worship. They have Justinian clubs that pay tribute to the old Roman civil law. And in part of that runs throughout is the concept of caveat emptor. That's C-A-V-E-A-T, caveat emptor, E-M-P-T-O-R, which means let the buyer beware. So, and that's another way of saying, if I'm a seller and I'm selling you you know, cans of paint, and I don't tell you that there's something wrong with those, that when you paint anything, the paint will wash out in the first rain. I'm not, under a caveat emptor system, I'm not responsible for my lies. You, as the unwitting buyer, are responsible for believing those lies. And I would draw people's attention to such a story that Donald Trump told on the campaign trail. And I don't know really the context, but he was talking about, it was one of those kind of Aesop fables, stories about some creature trusting a snake, bringing, or maybe it was a gullible man or woman, took the frozen snake into his or her home and fed it and warmed it up, and then the snake turns around and bites him or her, and killing him or her. And the outraged reaction is, but I took care of you. I believed that you wouldn't harm me. You knew I was a snake. I think Donald Trump makes a big deal out of that story, and I'm not sure the purpose of it, or anyway. So, but that's the kind of underlying stance that a psychopath will take, because the psychopath is never responsible. Even when we do our 3-notice process, and we give him or her every chance to rebut the statements contained in our notices, the statements of facts, rebut them with other facts. You have a certain amount of time to do that. They never do. And I believe that if they could, they would, but they don't. But it could be that they just consider themselves so far superior to the ones who are serving notices on them that they don't bother to rebut anything. Not only because maybe they don't want to make another statement, a false statement under oath, but also maybe because it seems pointless, because if they harmed the claimant who sent out the notice, they harmed the claimant, then what's the problem? It's the claimant's fault for believing the psychopath. You know, one of our people calls it the public serpents. The public serpents. All right. So we got the pathological lying, deception, conning, and with cunning, lack of sincerity, and then of course the lack of remorse or guilt goes with that. They have to have a theory under which no remorse or guilt is indicated, so they can always justify that. But their statutes and codes don't support that. But that's another reason they can't really rebut anything in our notices, because they don't have the tools to do it with that would be plausible to anybody with a lick of sense. Another one is lack of affect and emotional depth. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the phenomenon of the psychopath who studies other people's emotional responses and attitudes in certain situations so that he or she can mimic them. because he or she doesn't have those automatic built-in emotional responses. So, and there's other things that can mimic that, that can sound similar. I mean, I think for those of us who have been through trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, we do get a bit hardened. I know I have become a bit hardened, to say the least, and to a point where, it's not that I don't feel anything. Righteous indignation, a simmering anger, but it's not the pure emotions that I had as a kid, certainly. And so anyway, but with it's actually easier for some of us who are almost pathologically helping. We're employed in helping professions, and that's part of our personality. We're more inclined to feel emotion when trauma happens to someone else than when it happens to ourselves. Because when it happens to ourselves, we've already dealt with it, and we got a hard layer of calluses over our hearts when it comes to ourselves. Okay, so we've got the lack of remorse or guilt that goes with the caveat emptor position, lack of affect and emotional depth. That seems to be one of the main characteristics that sort of explains the what's supposed to be the genetic origin of psychopathy, because this is something where it would be difficult to fake. Typically, I understand that a study was done in which people would have their blood pressure and breathing and heart rate and all that monitored as they went through various tasks, and periodically, unexpectedly, they would get a jolt of electricity. And when sometimes there would be a precursor, I think there was usually a precursor to the jolt of electricity, music or something that would be a warning, like Pavlov's dogs had a bell, but that was for something good. But this was for something bad. There would be some prelude to it, some signal that you're about to get an electric shock. And normal people who are not psychopaths are going to, in anticipation, after a while, a learned anticipation, they're going to react involuntarily with increased blood pressure, higher rate of heartbeat, and so forth. That reaction, that visceral reaction, is typically absent in a true psychopath. So they don't have the normal fear of consequences for themselves, which is pretty creepy, when dealing with a psychopath as an enemy. Not that they don't care about their personal well-being. They're very selfish, but yet they don't have the emotion that goes with even self-protection. So we got through lack of affect, emotional depth, callous, certainly lack of empathy for other people. Are you kidding? For a psychopath, they would have to study how to mimic empathy, because that's not there. Then 10, a parasitic lifestyle. There you go. There's a fine line, if there's any line at all, between psychopathy and parasitism, because a parasite, certainly, a tapeworm is not thinking ahead. You don't have a lot of thought going into the tapeworm. If it were able to have any cognition of what the ultimate result would be of its destruction of its host, it would, that would not be a good plan for the tapeworm, but it's the only plan it's got. And so it is with the psychopath. Yes, they can be glib and they can be very bright, and they can get over on people with their lying and deception. So they can, they would be good at embezzlement. But to and one of these books has talked about that the CEOs of at least 1 in 4, 1 in 5 corporations probably are psychotic, not psychotic, psychopathic. Psychopathic. So, despite being parasitic, they're at least able to motivate their underlings to so that the corporation itself can be productive. Probably if left to their own devices, they wouldn't be able to think ahead enough, defer gratification enough to make any business venture very successful on their own. But some may have enough insight into their own parasitism that they know that if they're going to keep this up as a lifestyle, they're going to have to get other people to be productive for them. And of course, that's what every parasite does. The parasite loves it when you consume its favorite foods. Okay, then 11, short-tempered, poor behavioral controls. Again, that this doesn't deny that the lack of emotional depth. Being short-tempered is more just a reaction to frustration of their self-oriented goals, and they won't really. Typically, a psychopath won't attempt to control the results of his behavior because he doesn't care who suffers as a result of his or her losing his or her temper. Promiscuous sexual relations, again, would be, self, the typical selfish lifestyle, the focus on immediate gratification, the inability to defer gratification, goes hand in hand with promiscuity. The notion of being faithful to one partner in good times and bad, that's a psychopath would consider that to be a sucker's game, something he or she would never be involved in. Early behavior problems, that seems to suggest that maybe this is, in fact, genetically oriented. A lot of psychopaths apparently come from very loving, healthy families that have raised other children who are not psychopaths. So, make of it what you will. Item 14, lack of realistic long-term plans. Again, the psychopath doesn't really see the point in making long-term plans usually, um, unless those are long-term plans that he manipulates somebody else to implement. Um, and and the grandiosity prevents the psychopath from making plans that are at all realistic. He or she is too busy feeding his ego to consider objectively whether his plan is or her plan is actually realistic. Anybody want to jump in here?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Michael.
So that could also be related to ADD and all that kind of thing too. That point
Uh huh.
of unrealistic goals and so on, or at least big goals that are not attained. But on your promiscuous sexual relations,
Mhm.
uh, do you how do you relate in homosexuality and the hardness that goes with that? And I'm thinking of a particular person um, that is not unusual in the homosexual um,
Yes,
culture.
promiscuity is very common in the homosexual community.
Yes.
Yeah, particularly among male homosexuals, maybe more so than lesbians.
Mm-hmm. But you have in the lesbian culture too, or community, you have the butch,
Mhm.
and then the thing that I've seen a lot in these gay pride parades, and they're really aggressive in wanting to force their viewpoints down your throat. And these guys that have done the videos, we're taking your children, we're coming for your children, and so on. Especially during COVID, there was some boldness there where
Mhm.
they really came out callously and boldly and very demonically. So,
Yeah.
but that
Yeah.
you would include that into here, I would suppose.
I'm not saying that anybody who identifies as gay is necessarily that means that they're a psychopath.
No, I
Um,
wouldn't say that either.
right. Um, I remember a time, well, back in the '70s, when I was in law school, that gay people were they were really treated pretty badly, and um, it was unthinkable that they would be as aggressive as what we're seeing today. And I'm just wondering if what we see today in the gay prides is displays is something that we see that among straight people that they're also displaying psychopathic traits, being aggressive toward other people.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, isn't that the same? Can everybody hear me?
yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, I seen how they like try to like want to be they want to be seen, like they want to make a big want attention, and it's like if they don't get attention, they're all upset because oh, look at me, look who I am, look at what I am, like as if
Mhm.
we have to have it has to be put into our faces to see it. And it's like keep it to yourself. And this is I think it's a real problem when you try to force something on someone else,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that kind of gets into I
especially
think
among the
that
groups that you're discussing.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there are other forces that are creating psychopathic behavior, maybe among people who wouldn't innately be psychopaths necessarily. What do you think? I mean, I think that there are folks that are in these pride parades, for example, that are getting paid, like crisis
Oh,
actors do. You know,
yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
there's some kind of motivation to do it in the first place, and then it's not
right,
normal. There's nothing normal about it.
right, yeah,
right. But you do, one will get more aggressive when one is around a group encouraging that,
absolutely.
to some point or another. So,
Mhm, mhm.
and
Group think.
even, yeah, even the experiment, I think the Germans made a movie. There was a German movie about, they went on the street and hired some people for an experiment where they made a jail. So some were prisoners and some were the jailers. And
Yes,
it became very abusive and very psychopathic, um, on both
this
parts, I think.
that was a Stanford prison experiment that happened in the U.S. Dr.
Okay.
Philip Zimbardo. Yes,
Okay.
and then that set things up in Rumsfeld's mind for Abu Ghraib.
Mm,
Yeah,
I think it all comes down to the egotistical, controlling force that if the other person's being forced upon, and then a lot of that's going on too, and dependency as well.
yeah. Well,
mhm, mhm.
I'm gonna jump off of here, but I wanted to know your purpose in going through this is for what?
No, no, know your enemy.
Know your enemy. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to listen to the recording, and I appreciate you putting these things out and educating us.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for contributing.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Well, a lot of these are somewhat repetitious. I'll go through them quickly because I suspect that we're not going to get through everything I wanted to get through about psychopathy on this broadcast. So we might end up having to have another one to finish it up, particularly when we talk about the psychopathy that's being created as Keith, you and Michael got into. There have been multiple ways that psychopaths are being created, um, or at least the psychopathic behavior. So to recognize it, impulsivity, again, that's
Yeah, another
typical.
example too. The lone wolf scenario that we've been seeing a lot of. You get this lone wolf out there, and all of a sudden they say it's just one lone wolf. Well, there's other forces involved, not just one person that just decides to do something. There has to be some motivating factor behind it.
And often the lone wolf has been, carefully created, starting with Lee Harvey
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Sirhan B. Sirhan, and then then this latest idiot that July 13th who crawled on that roof. I mean, please.
Yeah, he was supposedly an excellent trained shooter, and he's a lone wolf, and he's only 20 years old, and he can do all the things that he did. Well, he had to have a lot of help.
You bet. You bet. If he did anything at all, you know. So we don't know because it seems like if this was if this was created, I don't know. There's other theories about that. I don't want to really necessarily get into the psyop within a psyop kind of scenario, but because I don't really care what they do in you know in the corporate electioneering world. But just, I think by now, surely we understand that nothing is as it seems. particularly when corporate media is reporting on it. There's another agenda. And I don't know about you guys. I started noticing that back in the 80s, I think. And I asked some people, have you ever been part of any event that was considered newsworthy at the time, maybe only at a local level, and you were there, you knew what happened, and then you later read about it in the newspaper or saw it on television. Did you notice anything about the accuracy of the news report compared to what you had yourself experienced having been there on the ground? I asked a lot of people that question, and every single man or woman I asked said, never does the corporate media, they weren't calling it that then, never does the media report what actually happened. They hide certain things that they don't want to talk about, and then they um, inject events that didn't happen into the story too.
Yeah, that's where the critical thinking, they want you to just throw that away and just assume whatever's told to you and dished out to you, or whatever, said or seen on the TV is what they want you to believe.
Mhm. 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 Um, okay, so we got the irresponsible behavior as a parent. Well, there's general irresponsibility, so of course you're going to be irresponsible as a parent if you're a psychopath. Um, it's more obvious maybe than being irresponsible in a relationship with another adult, though, because the child really does depend on a responsible parent more than another adult would depend on their partner. Um, Frequent marital relationships, well, that goes with a lot of the other stuff. Marriage isn't going to go too well if there's a lot of lying, a lot of sexual promiscuity, lack of remorse or guilt, etc. Juvenile delinquency, well, okay, apparently a true psychopath is going to show his or her colors after puberty. And okay, then poor probation or parole risk. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, because probation and parole people and those who write the reports have their own issues and their own corporate motivations. Um, then failure to accept responsibility for their own actions goes with the lack of remorse or guilt. Many different types of offenses. Okay, I think one of the books makes the point that serial killers even are not necessarily all psychopaths. A lot of them are, certainly more than in the general population, but um, other psychopaths, most psychopaths, probably, I think this, oh, one of the books was saying that many psychopaths, most of them, commit financial crimes. They don't kill people, most of them. However, of course, part of committing financial crimes these days, once we realize that, our so-called government, the people who are most in a position to affect us one way or the other, uh, they're going to be affected, and their behavior as far as being violent is going to depend on the financial motivations of the various psychopaths who are working in that corporate industry calling itself government. And then the drug or alcohol abuse, not the direct cause of the antisocial behavior. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe May maybe psychopaths drink maybe to entertain themselves. I doubt that they drink to drown their guilt because they don't have any guilt. Um, but yeah, but just being a repeat drunk driver, that's not going to be. Um, that's something else. That's something else. I don't think that's psychopathy. Okay. Um, anyway, all right. So let me find my way out of this maze. Um, how do I get back to? How do I get back to full to the other screen? Um, all right, there we go. Um, yeah. Um, okay, Diane has left. Um, so that you all know, and some of you have received the email that I sent out to a group of people who admitted to psychopathic behavior. I'm not saying that they're psychopaths, but uh, they I sent them all an email, and I want to take this opportunity to reveal who they are, and they happen to be the underlings of a fella who's been in the news quite a bit lately for using the power of the corporate state at gunpoint, of course, um, to force genital mutilation on children against the wishes of one or both parents. Um, so yeah, let me get into what I sent out. The invitation I uh, sent out to a number of people, and okay, there it is. Okay, just so that y'all know, this is what I sent out to uh, a group of uh, the CEO of state of Minnesota's his some of his underlings and their names. There's a Lori O'Brien, and I guess she's an administrator or a clerk or something at one or more of their state of Minnesota corporate tribunals calling themselves courts. The black robed ones involved in this are James Cunningham, Karen McCarthy, and Jenny Walker Jasper, who is the one that I understand authorized today's kidnapping of Melissa Bagel and her son that she had been trying to protect, Aaron Bagel, 7 years old. Then there was Joel Brott, who's with the corporate, some sort of corporate cop shop calling itself sheriffs in County of Sherburne, the corporation. Jeff Ruland, also another part of the cop shop in in County of Sherburne, Minnesota. Joe Gackey, another corporate agent of a corporate police department in Elk River, Minnesota. Grace O'Connick, an agent of Gackey's. Darren McKeeman at also of the cop shop in Elk River, Minnesota. Then there were the cop shop representatives from city of Ramsey, the corporation, Ramsey, Minnesota. Jeff Caters, Brad Wise, Dave Pachol, um, and then there were the admitted pedophile enablers, Matthew Vagel, the biological father, um, and Layla Workmeister Vagel, whose young daughter, very young, pre-puberty daughter, uh, was molesting the 7-year-old child and taking video of it. You don't hear about that every day. And that was brought to the attention of the so-called child protection people, and they could not wait to get the child back under the same roof as this child perpetrator, who nothing was being done for. Nobody asked any questions. Why would a little girl, apparently 10 years old, be uh, be committing sexual acts on a 7-year-old child? You know, that doesn't happen without that child having been exposed to adult sexual activity. Okay, so then we have the various attorneys that made sure that that the little boy would not be protected. Lynn Clicker Uthi, Susan Cragg, Ryan Wallace, Jacob Erickson, Tom Overhog, Mallory Stahl, Terry Melcher, Mary Sincota. Those were all the ones that, for a time, persuaded the mom, Melissa Vagel, that they were going to help her and help her protect her child. All they did was tell her, "You better sell your house so you can pay us." And that's what she did, and somehow managed to get another house. But anyway, that's another story. Then there was a woman by the name of Deborah Link, who provides the so-called psychological justification for the actions of the other psychopaths. And she's got, her own racket going, and every so-called family court or juvenile court or just about any other court has a list of mental health professionals that will, for a price, tell them whatever they want to hear about the people that are in front of them. And increasingly, they are coming up with opinions like, basically, every child needs to be exposed to pedophilia. There's an organization called NAMBLA, been around for quite some time, stands for the North American Man-Boy Love Association, NAMBLA. Their motto is sex before 8, before it's too late. Well, I guess that's what they were trying to do in this case. Then we had another psychopathic actor who had an opportunity to dispute this but didn't. Don Birdsall. He's an agent of Joe Gackey's that mentioned earlier. And then there was Patrick Dollar, Dahler, who was with the corporate United States Postal Service and aided and abetted in the sending of verbal threats of armed attacks to Melissa Vagel. And they kept this up for at least several weeks. There were other attacks that came. There was an indiscriminate trespassing once, twice, 3 times a day to the house, and by armed men, beating on the door, leaning on the doorbell. at all hours of the day and night. And then also, there were other, here's a few others: Catrice Ringham, Ringham, Jennifer Clemens. Ringham was I think, one of the black robed ones. Jennifer Clements, Clements. A She's one of the attorneys that for County of Sherburne that helps administer the criminal aspects. In other words, when parents are unwilling to sacrifice their children, she makes sure that there are so-called criminal penalties that will be inflicted on the non-obedient parent. Then there is Ben Stock, also known as Benjamin Stock, with County of Sherburne, so-called child protection. I would remind everybody, don't be deceived by the protection in the name Child Protection Service, because they have no duty to protect. Even children who are imminently in danger of being murdered, there is no duty to protect them from that. So what are they there for? Well, they're there for the same reason any corporate agent is there, to pick up a paycheck in exchange for furthering the objectives of the corporation. What is the purpose of a corporation? What's the purpose of any corporation? It's to generate revenue. And Benjamin Stock was no exception to that. Finally, the last one I sent the email to was a Christy Stanislawski, and I believe she was another one of the black robed ones that either has acted or is poised to act, and it stands by to give aid and comfort to the others on this list when they do what they do. Anyway, I'll run through it fast. I extend this invitation. This is what I wrote to him about 5 or 6 hours ago, when I learned that there had been a kidnapping, battery, and false imprisonment of Melissa Vagel. This invitation is based not only on the timely nature of the subject of our interactive radio broadcast this evening, namely psychopathy, but also factually on your admissions on 3 separate occasions to having aided and abetted as living men and women, not as legal fictions or as any other corporate roles you may be playing, in the commission of multiple crimes against the woman Melissa Vagel and her 7-year-old son Aaron. My information is that the most recent of your crimes occurred today, August 22nd, 2024, upon your armed kidnapping, battery, and false imprisonment of Melissa Vagel. I do not yet have information on what stage of child trafficking in which you may be currently involved as to her 7-year-old son, Aaron. Perhaps one of you might enlighten us. We will be reading on air the details of the facts that you folks have been admitting to for several months. And I don't know if anybody wants to sit through that, but just so you know, this was not, what was done to this child was no small thing. Anyway, if anybody wants me to read it, I will. If anybody wants to know the details, I will point out that I have posted on Melissa Vagel's Facebook timeline and on mine a lot of the details, certainly, of my invitation to them, which looks like they've declined without the courtesy of an RSVP. Okay. So going back to how are we doing on time? We're a little over an hour. I won't go more than an hour and a half. And hopefully we might be able to finish. I don't know that we have enough for a full broadcast for next time, but there's um, a number of books um, that I can refer people to study what to look for in a psychopath. But at some point, we have to act and not just react. The book that Frank had mentioned last time, and that was written by the man who created the psychopathy checklist, is called Without Conscience, and it is available in PDF online. Okay. Now, and I should have brought this up earlier, there are some Bible references to, and more than just this, but here are some Bible references to psychopathic behavior, and what the consequences are for that, and there's and there, at least as to Deuteronomy 21 verses 18 through 23. This is also a guide to God's thinking at that time. Of course, this was before our Savior had come to earth, but at that time it was being said, if a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, this might be a euphemism for something else, I don't know, who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them. Remember, this was a time that the Ten Commandments were fresh in the minds of the people, and honoring one's father and mother. Maybe the father and mother don't deserve honoring, but at least the fact that they are, to do honor to the family is not the same thing as, for example, if your father or mother is a psychopath, you're not supposed to honor them by doing what they do. But in any case, then shall the father and the mother hold on to him, and bring him out unto the elders of his city, and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, I assume they have a choice to do otherwise if the circumstances merit it. The parents would say, this is our son. He is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of the city shall stone him with stones, that he die, so that thou put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt surely bury him that day. For he who is hanged is accursed by God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So it certainly seems like in those days, and perhaps even now, it's believed that only through capital punishment sometimes are those who are irremediable, whose hearts can never be made right, for the good of the community, and to prevent further destruction, that person is administered the death penalty. Of course, that has not been done away with by the coming of Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ did bring about the fairness of the three notice process, which we has been mimicked in the corporate tribunals and called due process of law. A person, a man or woman, should be given an opportunity to rebut the accusations against him. All right, and then in Titus 1:15 through 16, unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient. I think that refers to disobedient to the Ten Commandments, and unto every good work reprobate. Okay, there is. We had mentioned when looking at the checklist that psychopathy and parasitism are very close, and I'm going to post a couple of videos that kind of demonstrate that even visually there's kind of an eerie similarity in the mindlessness of a tapeworm or other parasite and the mindlessness of a psychopath who's only concerned not just about numero uno, but numero uno right now, this minute. There is also another Bible verse that apparently has been translated a number of ways about casting out demons, but the demons can only be cast out. That's another explanation that psychopathic behavior is evidence of demon possession. Only if the one in being possessed prays and fasts. And that is so closely related, as I'm sure you know, Keith, to getting rid of parasites. Parasites, probably, I mean, fasting is definitely a big way to flush out parasites. And prayer has got to make that do even better. And then there's another link I'm going to post on my Facebook timeline when I post the archive of this video showing close-up pictures of parasites that even look like demons. Pretty creepy.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot, Catherine, of the the toxins of these parasites that can affect the brain in a number of ways. One is the compulsion or the rush or the creating a trying to explain how there's a compulsion that's created by the toxicity of the brain when these things happen. And what usually happens is, when something's taken over, the host or the parasite taken over, there's it's almost like parts of your brain just get suspended, where you have no reasoning, you have no ability to common sense is thrown out the window because you're put into this high mania compulsive behavior that leads to the very destructive patterns that we see.
Yeah, and I know people are aware of this blood-brain barrier, which would normally protect the brain against parasitic infestation, but uh, there are maybe some toxins that can break through that. And there's, of course, then parasites themselves go through various life cycles, and this is described in gross detail in Dr. Hulda Clark's book, The Cure for All Diseases, which is also available online in PDF. Um, Parasites um, have excrement like bacteria do that is even more toxic than they are, and so that the waste from the parasites can definitely be a brain toxin. I don't think this is very well studied at all.
Well, and there's also too the factor, in a lot of cases, some people will end up on the fentanyl and get on that bandwagon where you become addicted. Your body, the receptors in your brain want that, and of course it feeds the rest of it, the rest of the sickness, and it just propagates it even further along if you add those elements to it.
I, I've I think Dr. Clark says that when you feed the parasite, the toxin that it likes, the parasite, and we all have parasites, and they can be excreted normally by our organs of elimination that our Heavenly Father has granted to us. We don't have to be parasitized just because we sometimes have parasites. But when those parasites are fed their favorite toxins, they can go through their life cycles and they can start to burrow into the particular organ that they would normally infest, and then travel. And that's when the gateways into the brain may be opened up, either by the action of the toxin itself or by the physical action of the daughter cells from the parasite that are moving and traveling throughout the body system. So, um, and this tends to explain maybe why. I think this may close it out. I'm going to mention Ann Blake Tracy and her work. She's with the International Coalition for Drug Awareness. That's International Coalition for Drug Awareness, and she has studied. I don't know that she would call it that, but she has studied drug-induced psychopathy, and in particular the association of serotonin, something it's SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I think they're called. But it's not just SSRI pharmaceuticals; it's other pharmaceuticals that have been associated with mass violence. And I think she first began studying this with the Columbine shooting. And it was known that Klebold and his partner were taking, I believe it was the drug that's spelled Prozak or ZAC. She wrote a book called Prozac. What does she call it? Panacea or um, Panacea or Pandora. As in the Pandora's box. and she has been an expert witness in multiple bizarre shooting cases, including ordinary housewives and grandfathers and people who never had a criminal history at all and may have only taken the pharmaceutical for a week or two in some instances. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they just gun down their whole family and oftentimes turn the firearm on themselves. And this was a recognized concept. I remember in the 80s, I was reading um, uh, so-called case law in the Ohio Bar Journal about at the appellate level that basically doesn't everybody know that there's a risk of mass violence when you take these pharmaceutical products? They don't talk about that much anymore and haven't really since then. But at one time, it was sort of thought to be common knowledge that if you took a drug for to stop depression, you might become homicidal and suicidal.
Yeah, they say it on their side effects is one of the things that a lot of these drugs do.
Yeah,
They,
it's one of their
not only
the
just the SSIs, but a lot of other ones too as well.
yeah. The SSRIs got the black box warning from the Fraud and Death Administration. I mean the FDA. Yeah. Okay, so there's certainly plenty of um, reasons that ordinary people um, are engaging in psychopathic behavior. And that's almost more alarming um, than thinking that we only have to deal with 2% of the population. And, according to what Hare was writing 20, 30 years ago, only a small percentage of those would be violent. Now we're seeing in every city there's a gang of violent people wearing costumes and sporting badges that are fully armed to commit acts of senseless violence against the rest of us for little, if any, reason other than financial gain or they're just irritated at the moment. Um, I, I thought I'd mention too, in case people don't know it, I'm in contact with a relative of the woman known as, well, her name was Sonia Massey, and I wanted to say it happened in Ohio, but it may not have. But she called the police, so-called police, didn't know that the police have no duty to protect or serve, but she thought they did because that's the narrative. And she called them because she suspected that there was a prowler around her house. They they came and one of them shot her and killed her. And I guess he's being prosecuted, but my money is on, in 5, 10 years or less, probably less, that guy's going to be recommended to some other department, preferably for work with juveniles. Happens all the time. So, decisions at all levels, and from the street to corporate board meetings, are being made by people who have the characteristics that are described by by the psychopathy checklist. So think about that the next time you think that you're going to ask one of them to take care of the others that are committing the same kinds of acts that they are. and making money in the process. Um, we don't have the luxury of just sitting back and waiting for somebody else to just do something. So I think we're just going to conclude that in our discussion of psychopaths. I would remind people, Frank's words when he reminded me of the book about psychopaths and without conscience, that that they are the best strategy is avoidance. Yes, that's a great strategy, but as time goes on, and the Bible tells us the same thing, flee from them, come out of her, come out of Babylon. And yet people won't do that. They enter in to the layers that at Babylon and Babylon's minions are administering. So we're rapidly getting to the point where there's not going to be any avoidance. It's just going to be everywhere. Well, it's not quite everywhere yet. And we can still take action, not as rebels, not as trying to out psychopath the psychopaths. No, we do it by being lawful and godly, and taking on the responsibilities that God gave us that go with the privilege of dominion over this planet. And so I'm just going to remind people it's time to grow up. And in particular, back to Melissa Vagel, my latest information is that they are indeed sending the child back into the sexually abusive home, and I believe they confiscated her paperwork, although I do believe that she's got her originals in a safe place. Well, in any case, she was in the process, and hopefully she will resume that process of creating a common law court for the people of the original Minnesota Republic, just as we have done in the original Ohio Republic that still lives on in our hearts and minds. And so people in Minnesota who have had enough, please contact her or me. And if you're interested, I will help you get yourself a little bit further extracted from Babylon, and so that you can be a worthy member of a common law godly court there for the people of Minnesota who deserve it. Anything else anybody wants to say?
Yeah, maybe the next time or some future date we could even discuss the aspects of the receptor sites in the brain, how they can be more. There's more keys that can go into those receptors to turn them on or turn them off, depending on the situation. We can talk about that a lot more. There's a lot to that, and a lot
Of
of
course, this
people are more more prone to that, and they should try to avoid as much as possible those situations if they can. And maybe we can talk about that at some other future date.
yeah, well, people have to be motivated to not become psychopathic. And right now, I mean, once you are a psychopath, or once you go down that road far enough, you never see the problem.
Well,
So
yeah,
you
it's like
never,
a snowball going downhill. It just keeps going and it gets worse.
right. I was sort of surprised by Michael's question. Why would we be even discussing psychopaths? Really? Aren't we? Haven't we all been victimized by them? Wouldn't it be? I mean, going back to not just the Bible, but Sun Tzu, The Art of War. If you don't know, if you don't know who you are, and you don't know who your enemy is, you're not going to be in any shape to come out, you know, well in any conflict situation. So,
No, it certainly wouldn't make it any easier, that's for sure. It would make it much more difficult to get through it because you would be, traumatized by whatever's happening around you.
yeah, yeah, and I encourage people to keep your eye on what is God's purpose in this. God is controlling everything, and as I've mentioned before, and we all have, it seems to be about separating out the wheat from the tares, testing us, um, and it's the more difficult it becomes, the more of a test it is, and it didn't have to get to this point, but people wanted to worship mammon. They wanted power. Some of the early kings, they wanted so much power they sacrificed their own children to Moloch. And that's the god that they go through a ceremony with in Bohemian Grove every year. It's still a thing. At the Chicago World's Fair, they had a tribute to Moloch, and I'm sure there was something in the Olympics about that. So yeah, we're not just making stuff up here that isn't already in your face. So I want people to focus on what they can do in avoiding and staying out of Babylon instead of trying to fix the people who are running Babylon, because those people don't want to be fixed. If they do, they can study the word, they can do what needs to be done, but it should be on them to do it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Keith, and thanks to Frank for making it possible, and everybody else who participated. And let's get ourselves out of Babylon, folks. Until next time, time will be the 12th of September, God willing. Thank you all. We'll see you then. Good night.